Live. Oh yeah, he has to view us. Search. NonLead. Just getting NonLead Partnership and a few other people. Oh, I gotta wedge my glass. Is that working? That's working, I think. I'm balancing that in a beer glass. Hey guys. Let's see, I invited NonLead to join. I'll get my phone back out. NonLead. Add. Waiting for NonLead. Woohoo! Alright. There, now I think it's working.
Look at that.
How's it going, man? Whoops, that's my hand.
The magic of technology.
I'm just wedging my phone in the beer glass that I mentioned to you before. That's my tripod or bipod. Or, yeah.
I like it. I like it. Got to just finagle it just right. You know, the problem with that is now you've got one less glass per beer. So, hey, look at that.
Hey, all right. Hey, there's perks, right? Yeah, I'm going to open this coconut IPA. I've had it before. It's pretty good.
Huh. Yeah.
You gotta like coconut, of course.
Yeah, not really my speed.
Oh, man. You're probably like this pizza either.
Lost you there.
I said you're probably one of those guys who doesn't like pineapple on his pizza either.
I don't mind pineapple as long as it's matched up with something meaty and salty.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But,
yeah. There we go.
Coconut beers, for whatever reason, just haven't quite done it for me.
Sorry, I'm laughing at Teresa. She's asking, are we drinking to a word? Because last time, what happened was we came up with the idea that every time Scott Napoli said the word "boar" for male bear, we all took a drink. So they're all already. I'll let the audience decide what word to drink to. That's on them. That's on. I take no responsibility.
Boxers.
We still got a couple minutes. I'll just let people trickle in. As I mentioned,
I think we're getting people from all over the world on this one. I'm recognizing a couple folks from different places, at least all over the continent.
Good.
It's kind of nice.
So Jack votes that whenever you say copper, we take a drink.
Okay, how many times in a minute can I say copper?
Right there. That's it. Cheers. I blame Jack on that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, there'll be a lot of people. Obviously, I think we both know on here. It should be fun. And for those that, I would assume everyone's aware, but if they're not, obviously, this is Leland from NonLead, and this is the BHA's second Instagram live pint night. These are kind of fun ways to just reconnect. Oh, we had another vote for copper. Don't say it right now. we got a whole hour. We got to pace ourselves.
Well, we're the only ones on video, so everyone else can get up and get back to the fridge.
That's true. That's true.
Hopefully they're drinking copper ales.
There you
go. Couldn't resist.
Yeah, well, I'll just take small sips. Anyway, yeah, for everyone watching, if you didn't catch us last time, go ahead and ask questions during, but Leland probably won't answer at the time because they'll be scrolling by. But I got this the old-fashioned notebook here, and I will, and actually I'm just going to pull this up on my laptop so I can see it better as well, although I need to mute it or else we get really bad feedback. And then what we can do is, at the end when we have the Q&A, I'll just kind of hand off the questions as I read them to Leland, and he can answer them. So fire away as you feel, and I will be able to see them on the computer that I have next to me and be able to write them down. So. It is 6 o'clock, so we might as well just sort of dive right in. Again, just quick introduction. Obviously, I'm Joel with Oregon BHA, and we're excited to have our second Instagram live pint night with Leland from NonLead. And there is a magic word which you can peruse the comments to see. For some people, they say they want to drink on, turning these into drinking games, but hopefully you'll get some education as well from it, and I think it's going to be really cool. I know a lot of people were really excited about getting to chat with you, Leland, and just kind of hear hear a lot about kind of the Non-Lead Coalition and the benefits of using non-lead ammunition. So.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, hopefully I don't disappoint anybody because this is a new format, so we're figuring it out as we go, right?
Yeah. These are just casual chats.
Yeah. So I've got a whole table full of crap right here, but we'll get to that in a minute. I figure I'd start first with kind of, I met a fair number of people over the years, but for those who don't know me, I am Leland Brown. I am the current and first non-lead hunting education coordinator at the Oregon Zoo, which is a little odd that a zoo is talking about hunting. But the whole non-lead concept falls right back into conservation and good stewardship of wildlife. And so this is something that the zoo got interested in, and I was lucky enough to get hired out of a position I was working in Hawaii, where I was flying around in helicopters and hiking around and shooting pigs. And every time I tell people that, they look at me like I lost my damn mind. And why did I move to Oregon to talk about bullets when I could have just been having fun?
And sitting in the rain.
But, yeah, it's a little hot in Hawaii for me. The last couple of days have been rough just for the warmth. So being in a cooler spot, it's been pretty nice. So yeah, that's my background really, is I was an invasive species removal biologist. I used to go around and remove feral pigs and goats and feral cats from places that had high conservation kind of qualities that we wanted to maintain, and having those invasive species there just wasn't a good situation. And I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of really cool people doing that, including members of the public who are hunting, and just a lot of the staff as well, and learned a lot from a lot of different people. And in one of those programs, I got asked to use non-lead ammo, and I didn't know what they were talking about. So I just got involved in researching kind of what ammo was available, how it worked, what the reasoning behind conservation around it was, and how to make it work in the firearms we were using. And I've kind of been attached to it ever since. I feel like we've got this incredibly strong history as conservationists within the hunting and angling community. The sports, I hate saying sportsmen because it's the outdoor tradition community, I think, is a better way to do that. And this is one more way we can accomplish our goals as being good stewards, and making sure that when we're on the landscape, we're managing our impacts to have them only be the things that we want and nothing else. As I always say, leave it better than you found it, right? And so this is another way to accomplish that. To make notes, because I tend to ramble, so I got to make sure I'm not going way off somewhere.
No worries.
Yeah, so that stewardship was really what it was about. So leaving those positions, seeing the need for someone who does have an attachment to the hunting tradition, and then connecting that to the science, so that we are using best available science to implement our hunting, and using the best tools available. And when I started here, this is a Oregon program with the zoo, but this is not an Oregon specific issue. So when we start talking about how hunters are addressing this, we're not talking about just people in Oregon. We're not talking about just people in Arizona, where there was already programs going. We're not just talking about California and how they implemented things there. We're talking about continent-wide and really worldwide when you start looking through the research. Pretty much if you're shooting animals with lead, the potential for unintended exposure exists. And so I started talking again with some folks I used to work with when I started here in Oregon, and we came up with, kind of reinvigorated the idea to create a partnership between everybody and have it be hunter-led. And that's a really key piece, is that we want the North American Non-Lead Partnership to be a conservation movement around hunting, led by hunters, connecting other hunters to the information, so that we can all make educated and informed decisions to improve the landscape. And so that's where we've been. We launched the partnership in 2018, and we've been running around like crazy, talking to folks and sharing a lot of the information that I'll share with you this evening, and not playing as many as the copper drinking games, but we're you know, we know how to go out there and have a good time, and also make sure that we're staying engaged and informed, and getting in the field and going hunting. So real quickly, Eddie's just trying to rack the count up here.
Nothing wrong with that. It is a pint night.
It is a pint night, right? I got to keep my head a little bit clear so I can keep working.
Tomorrow, so I can't go too deep into the well.
Right. You know, so the big thing is when we start talking about ammunition, we're talking about a technology. And, you know, it's the same as anything else. It's the same as technology around different cartridges, the same as technology around firearms themselves. The bullets are their own, you know, type of technology. And fortunately, in the 80s, we started to see the implementation of these all copper bullets, specifically by Barnes, who were the first kind of commercially available and successful bullet made of all copper. But
you're gonna kill me by the end of this podcast.
This is going to be a problem for everybody. But they weren't developed to be some, you know, green bullet. They weren't some hippy dippy sort of thing. They weren't those guys making shotgun shells out of flower seeds to go plant flowers. This was to be a more efficient tool to harvest game and to work better than the current technologies. And the reason why it works is because we've known forever that lead is soft to deform to create that mushroom shape. However, being that soft, it also has a high potential to strip and lose a portion of the front edge of that bullet in very small pieces of lead that peel away under the really high pressures that it's under on impact with an animal. And so what we see is a loss of weight, which is well recognized. I mean, you go back into the 50s and 60s, and all the advertisements and the development of the partition bullet and all these different things to try to address this. Really, the change is looking at a new material rather than changing how the jacket, the copper jacket, or the different formation of material around that lead core. You know, you're looking at a partition, the way to solve it is to put a wall there so that back half of the bullet stays together. You look at bonded bullets, and they're using chemical or electrochemical techniques to bond the core into the jacket so that it doesn't separate. With the copper bullets, what you end up with is an expanding bullet that has no core to separate, and the material is set up in a way and has kind of just the specific kind of technique, the way its technique is evolved, and the way the material actually works is it does not come apart in the same way. It is not soft enough to strip. What you sometimes see is occasionally the breaking of small pieces when they get kind of overstressed. So you see that shear forcing on a pedal when a pedal gets flexed back and forth and just snaps off. But other than that, you're really not seeing those impacts. So across the board, you've got a technology that evolved to create the solution, and then a new issue, conservation issue, was identified following kind of all the lead shot concerns with waterfowl, where we saw raptors and other scavenging species getting high levels of lead that didn't seem to be associated with waterfowl hunting. And so, you know, the big one ends up being the California Condor. That's kind of the poster child that people think of. The important thing about the California Condor is not necessarily that they're highly susceptible. They're actually fairly tough. They handle lead probably as well or better than any other species. They just get exposed to it a lot because they only eat dead stuff. And so people put a lot of dead stuff on the ground. But the really critical thing is that they're kind of the canary in the coal mine. They're a species that was really endangered down to very few individuals. I think it was 22 total in the world at one point, and then was started to be re-released, and every single bird was tracked. And so they were able to identify these sources and kind of follow them really cleanly, which we don't see happen with wildlife research a lot. Usually we're taking a small sample out of a bigger population. This is a case where you're looking at every single individual for the whole population. You just rarely see that. And it gave us some really good insight into how lead exposure could be occurring for these scavenging species in the uplands rather than birds that are, you know, taking, you know, wounded ducks or something like that. Basically what it comes down to is this. We talked about copper bullets holding together really well and lead bullets tending to lose weight. Lead bullets do that from point of impact to exit. So once that bullet stops, it's not under enough pressure to keep shedding weight. Once it exits the animal, it no longer has something in contact with it to peel off, and the lead doesn't have anywhere to end up anyway. But as it's going through that animal and creating a wound channel, it's shearing off small pieces as it goes, and that's left embedded in that tissue. And for us, that's generally heart or lung or maybe the liver if we get a little far back, which are the parts of the animal, if we're successful, we don't take with us generally. I mean, if we shot a hole through the heart, we might leave that behind. We might take it with us depending on how damaged it is. Lungs, not very many people are out there hauling the lungs out with them. So we leave this nice pile of food behind of lungs and different organs that some people take, some people don't, and a lot of it's carrying some embedded lead fragments from there. And it's not, you know, people describe it as, oh, lead bullets explode. They don't explode. I mean, we've found bullets, you see that nice mushroom. They don't have those because that doesn't happen. It's not that they're blowing up, although that can occasionally happen as well. But what they are doing is just stripping away, losing weight, and then leaving that embedded in the tissue, which is then, like I say, this great food source for everything else. I mean, you know, especially when I was a field biologist and broke, would never pass up a free meal. You know, any other scavengers in the wild are the same way. I mean, if they don't have to expend a bunch of energy to catch something, they're just going to go to town and take advantage of an easily accessible resource. And so that's where we start to see the impacts on non-target animals like eagles, golden eagles, bald eagles in particular are pretty heavily studied. People like them. It's a lot easier to get money to study them. It's harder to find money to study something like, you know, songbirds or anything like that in some of these areas. They're just not as charismatic. So we get a lot of information about these big kind of charismatic predator birds. They're also a lot easier to find if they're lead poison, right? It's a bigger animal. It's easier to see. It's easier to, you know, for someone to say, oh, I see a big eagle that's just sitting there. Something's wrong with it. I'm going to take it in to see what's wrong with it to the department or a rehab center or something. So that's kind of where we're at right now. The research shows us this fragmentation rates. We're seeing fragmentation rates at the order of like averaging about 100 fragments per individual bullet. A lot of that depends on what you hit, how fast the bullet's going, when it hits. You know, if you hit bone or not, it's going to change, but that's the average. And that's in field testing where they actually went out and shot animals, x-rayed them, and started counting the fragments they could see in the x-rays because lead's going to show up really well in an x-ray. And then from there, it went into, okay, what are the options? I mean, we could stop hunting. I don't think anyone wants to do that. Or we could look at some new technologies. So the copper bullets already were there. They were well liked by a lot of people. And they were an option that allowed the continuation of the hunting tradition without this unintended impact. And what we've seen in the last 10 years is kind of an explosion in the technology where you've seen companies from Barnes, now Nosler and Hornady and Winchester loading stuff, and Federal all coming up with different versions or loading someone's version. And then a lot of these small companies as well, like Cutting Edge or Hammer Bullets, Cavity Back, all these other companies that these more kind of small, I don't know if boutique's the right word, but somewhat like that. They're just a smaller companies that have a little bit more flexibility and generally are selling bullets exclusively for reloading for people. But we're seeing this huge explosion in the technology as far as how it works, what people are trying to accomplish, the higher interest in long-range shooting and the need to adapt bullets to work in those circumstances versus your standard hunting distances, which is what most people are manufacturing hunting bullets for. And that's kind of where we're at now, is working through that process and getting people to understand. Unfortunately, there was this push in California to ban the use of lead bullets for all hunting. And unfortunately, what that seems to have done is create a suspicion that the science isn't good. The science is great. There's a lot of really good science documenting impacts, documenting the ability of the use of non-lead bullet to actually address the problem and still actually increase harvest numbers, so maintain good quality hunting. The problem is now that you have some politics that get involved, and anytime politics get involved in hunting, we all know we as hunters tend to be the ones who suffer a bit from that. And so the partnership's role is really to try to avoid the politics and work with people to share information, like I said in the beginning, so we can make good quality decisions based on good quality information.
Yeah, and Leland, I mean, I definitely, it's actually interesting you brought up hammer bullets. I actually just listened to a podcast with them. Really quickly, I do want to just welcome everyone who just joined. I saw a few people come in, Artemis and a few other people, so glad you guys could join us and everything. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting because, in listening to them, there was a really interesting talk, and you kind of brought it back to mind when you were talking about the effectiveness of copper bullets. And one of the things they brought up is that, and I don't know how versed you are on this, it was new to me, copper bullets are lathed and machined that way versus a lead bullet is pressed. And so there's actually less incidences of inconsistencies and therefore reduced issues of drag down range, reduced issues of penetration, and more energy into your target. Because again, with lead, as you mentioned, as it's breaking away, all it's doing is losing energy and losing that ballistic coefficient that everyone clings to, quite honestly, and looks at the box and says, hey, it's 0.631. Yeah, but it's not 0.631 300 yards away hitting an animal.
Right. Yeah, so the big challenge, I think, is that there's couple things there. One is, yes, the manufacture of the bullet is different because you can't just swage a copper jacket and a lead core together. So what you end up with is reducing the risk. Although, not to bag on the manufacturers at all, they do a phenomenal job, especially in the last 20 years, of really getting manufacturing so it's incredibly precise. But if you're not trying to put two materials together, the risk of having something go wrong in that process is no longer there. If you only have one material, you don't have issues of having voids between the copper jacket and the lead core and any of the issues associated with that. You don't have issues of inconsistent jacket thicknesses and the issues that go along with that. You don't have inconsistent kind of bullet tip shapes from having an exposed lead point, although there's debate about how impactful that is on your accuracy and anything like that. What you do have with copper, what I've experienced, particularly in these smaller companies, which tend to be CNC or lathe turned, like Hammer, like Cutting Edge, I think some of the larger companies are using some copper tubing and then also some swaging techniques to get into the shape of the bullet. But for these smaller companies, for sure, there's a lot more machining creation rather than some of that swaging action that's happening. And the consistency in weight I've found has been really pretty incredible. Weight and length, they've been incredibly consistent. I spent a portion of my social distancing time reloading a bunch of 270 ammo from Cutting Edge actually to test, because they decided I asked them if they were interested in us testing some of their ammunition. We don't recommend anything we haven't tested. They said, yeah, sure, sent us a couple of boxes to try, and so we're going through that process right now. And they were incredibly consistent. I mean, variation of maybe 0.2 grains as far as weight goes, and maybe a thousandths variation measuring off the ogive of the bullet. So incredibly consistent manufacturing, which was going to translate with consistent loading into consistency on target. Once you have a load worked up, if you don't have variation in the manufacturing, that's one less variable you're worrying about in creating an accurate shot on target, which is a huge benefit. The bigger thing for me, for consistency though, I've seen pretty good consistency across the board, lead, copper. I've not really had a problem finding bullets for people that are accurate using copper bullets. It's generally a thing about shifting down in weight class because of the densities difference. A lead bullet's more dense, it's going to be slightly longer or slightly shorter for weight. A copper bullet being less dense is going to be slightly longer for weight. The only direction you can go is length. You can't expand diameter for a cartridge. It's a 30 caliber, it's a 30 caliber, but you can make it a little bit longer to get to weight. The consistency that I really like with the copper bullets is consistency in performance on target. So with a lead bullet, you've got those two materials melded together. The copper jacket really is what's controlling expansion to a certain extent. You also have kind of the alloy of lead that's used. But with a copper bullet, what you end up with is, rather than have a deforming or having a mechanical change in shape where the lead hits and is basically smashed and just turns into a ball front rather than a point, what you have with the copper is a hydraulic expansion. So as fluid gets, there's going to be that small point either underneath a polymer tip or an exposed small hollow point. As fluid enters that, it's going to create hydraulic pressure that's going to split that bullet open, which is why you get these incredibly consistent expansion and mushrooms out of copper bullets. And you're going to see that time and time again if you recover a bullet, because generally with the high weight retention, you're getting very good penetration and pass through. So from a consistency standpoint, kind of across the board, I find the copper bullets to be hugely useful and beneficial as a technology. The last piece I wanted to say to that is kind of the accuracy piece. And this is where I think a lot of people run into problems, is they look at what they're currently using. Say you're using, stick with Nosler because it's an Oregon company. Say you're using the Nosler AccuBond out of a 30-06 and you're hunting elk. So you go for a 180 grain AccuBond bullet. If you attempt to use a 180 grain E-tip, which is their all copper version, you may or may not get the accuracy you're looking for because that length is going to be longer. And so trying to stabilize the bullet out of that twist rate may not actually work. You might end up with a destabilized bullet with increased yaw through the air where it starts to throw shots a little bit. But if you try dropping down into the 168s, 165s, or even the 150s with the copper bullets for a 30-06, what we see is much improved accuracy a lot of the time. So we're getting much better groups. And because of the high weight retention, we're still getting as good or better penetration a lot of the time than what we're seeing with the heavier lead cord bullets, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. A couple benefits there. Shoots a little faster. Generally that translates to shoots a little flatter out to distance. At most kind of typical hunting ranges, there's not really any loss to be seen there. If you start getting out to, you know, the 800,000 yard range, then considering the heavier weight bullets for momentum is a little bit different conversation. But for most of us, that's not really an issue. Sorry, I'm getting texted right now about my buddy just shooting a feral hog with a copper bullet. So
there you go.
I'm gonna have to look at those pictures after we get finished with all this.
Too bad we can't share on Instagram. I'm sure everyone would like to see it.
Yeah.
The technology's not quite there yet, but it'll get there. But
yeah, we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that brings up a lot of conversation about kind of the philosophy, wounding philosophy, and how we talk about damage. And unfortunately, that's a strange science, and we only have a certain amount of information out there. I'm taking Golden Ruzy's advice.
That's
Getting a little harsh.
Jack. That's Jack Lander. So
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, if you think about wounding, you know, you talked about energy before, right? And we talk about energy a lot because energy is an easy number to measure. You say, well, if we have this much energy, it should work really well. But energy is not actually an accurate depiction of damage.
right.
It's a way that we can talk about it easily, but it's not really an accurate depiction of damage. So when we're thinking about wounding, and wounding as in, Eddie, I can only drink so much while I'm talking. That's I'm left out of the coppers. That's the deal. That's how it works.
He's the primary.
The wounding potential is something that, you know, and we don't think about, when we're talking about wounding, we're not talking about wounding an animal and having it get away. We're talking about the creation of the wound. So,
wound cavity, yeah.
Right, exactly. So if we think about wounding potential, we've got a bullet entering and it expands. I'm going to do this because I really like this idea of me being able, so you've got an expanded bullet. So what you end up happening is having this deflection of tissue in a shock wave. And so when we talk about permanent wound channel, we're talking about two things. We're talking about the actual path of the bullet and the width of the bullet tearing tissue. But we're also talking about that shock wave stretching tissue past its ability to stretch anymore and then creating tearing from that. So what you actually end up with is these kind of tears that stretch out in certain places. And what we see is that at high velocity, the bullet will enter, you'll see it expand, and this is what the wound channels will actually look like. So you'll see as the bullet enters, it's a Spitzer point, as it expands and is still going pretty fast, it's pushing a lot of tissue, and this is the path of the bullet right here. It's pushing a lot of tissue out to those sides and stretching it. But as it slows down, you're actually seeing a reduction in the width of that wound channel, which I'm sure most of us have seen looking at animals on the far side. Sometimes that wound channel in a kind of deep angling shot is not going to be as wide. But if you've got a consistent and maintained front to the bullet, you're still at least getting that amount of wound happening there. And if a bullet maintains velocity through that, it's actually going to push slightly more tissue out and away and tear it slightly more deeper in the animal. And that's kind of what we've seen in the research looking at copper ammunition, is because it holds its weight so much better, it actually creates higher velocities deeper in the animal and creates wider wound channels deeper in. So for me, that's huge, right? I've got a hard angling shot and I need to penetrate and have a good wound channel at the tail end of that. With a copper bullet, I feel like I can really rely on that to, one, be consistent in expansion, and then two, maintain velocity and penetration and the front of that bullet to create the widest possible wound channel where it's needed the most.
He's catching up.
I'm trying to live up to the standard here.
Yeah.
A very refreshing beverage. It may or may not be alcoholic.
Yeah, I didn't ask this time. I figured it's like.
Yeah. So what you see is, you know, if you look at two, so you take, say, an AccuBond through water, and I don't know if you can see this, and you see the mushroom on the front of that, and you see how it gets kind of deformed and actually peeled back to the point and peeled away from the edge. So you have a slightly smaller mushroom in that case. Oops, versus that copper bullet where you see the front maintains. Once it's expanded, it stops. And you have that pushing all the way through. So there's actually some benefit associated with that and for having that maintenance of velocity deeper into the animal. Of course, a lot of people will say, well, it goes all the way through, it wasted energy. But that wasted energy is not necessarily translating to damage. And that's the thing we've got to be careful about when we're talking about, you know, the wounding damage potential and how that all works. Because unfortunately, numbers are really easy to throw out, but sometimes they're not really an accurate indication of what's going on.
Yeah, well, and that's why I brought up that I think that a lot of people run out and buy a box of ammo based on its BC, and they don't really know what it means, just that higher is better, higher is better. And it's like, well, yes and no. I mean, there's velocity, there's a lot of factors in there, and then there's the energy extension, like you said, downrange. And so those are things that maybe some hunters simply just haven't heard or haven't thought of. And so that's one of the reasons we're so glad to have you on here.
Yeah, and I'm as much a fan of BC as everybody else, right? I mean, I love an efficient bullet that's going to carry out there, but I'm not going to sacrifice practical use for ballistic coefficient. Yeah. So a lot of the really high BC bullets tend to be fairly fragile. So if we're talking about practical use, when we're in the field hunting, we're sometimes as likely to have an animal jump out at 50 yards as we are at 400. I want a bullet that's going to work at both. If I select a type of bullet that's not going to work particularly well at 50 yards, people will argue, well, you're limiting yourself by selecting a copper bullet because it has to have certain velocity for expansion. Generally, we're looking at about 1,800 feet per second. I would prefer to keep it above 2,000 for good expansion. 1,800 is kind of like starting expansion. But if I'm selecting a copper bullet, I'm giving myself from muzzle to whatever that range is as an effective, practical application of that bullet. There are other bullets that don't work particularly well at close range. Their jackets are too thin, the lead is too soft. They're very high BC. They'll work a little bit better out at extended ranges than maybe some of the copper bullets will. But I've just limited the ability to shoot something that comes out close to me. And when I'm thinking about hunting, I'm more concerned about being able to have that successful shot close to that 400 than I am at having, 100 to 800. Like, I want the ability to have those close shots. Because those are the ones that are exciting. I can always walk closer to something. It's harder for me to pick up and walk away from something. So I want to be able to shoot it when it's right in front of me. And you can switch that around. There's bullets out there that are designed, copper bullets designed for longer range shooting. And so we're seeing that technology evolve with all the interest so that you're getting these much higher BC fragmenting style bullets, and we're at extreme long ranges. We also start talking about different wounding philosophy because the velocity isn't there. You're not creating as much of that shock wave. So then talking about having mechanical damage of, say, a fragment flying off may be more important, although I haven't seen any solid evidence of research documenting that. Bonded bullets, I got to answer this one because bonded bullets come up a lot.
Oh, yeah, I would expect.
Bonded bullets are great at keeping the jacket and the core together. They do not necessarily keep the lead from stripping away from the front of the bullet. Some are better than others, of course. And shot placement matters a lot. You hit a lot of bone, you're more likely to shear some of that off. You miss all the bone, you're less likely to shear some of it off. But no matter what we see is that if it's got a lead core, we're seeing fragmentation happening. And so the thing with bonded bullets is that the way they're designed, their kind of operating window is about the same as a copper bullet. So if I can have the same kind of operating window of velocities, I have just as good BC or better BC depending. I can go with a slightly lighter bullet maybe and shoot it faster, have it be a little bit flatter, reduce kind of holdovers or issues like that. Then I'm going to go with the copper bullet. And then on the tail end of that, if I've got some stewardship that comes along with it, that's a bonus on top of everything else.
And just because I wanted to bring this up, and it seems like a good moment since we're talking about all these different bullets in BC, just because not everyone who's watching or watching later may understand exactly what we're talking about, do you have a simple definition of ballistic coefficient, like just really basic?
Yeah, really simple. Ballistic coefficient would be aerodynamics of the bullet. So how efficiently does it fly through the air? I mean, that's the easiest way to think about it. And there's different measurements based on different models. So there's the G1, which is based on a certain type of bullet, and they're basically using that as the reference and measure everything off of that. And there's the G7, which is off a different type of bullet, and using that as kind of the base model and measuring everything off of that. And they give you different numbers. So,
well, and I know
so yeah. You know, ballistic coefficient can be important depending on what you're doing, but we haven't worried about it for a long time. We've killed an awful lot of animals over the years. It's not the end-all, be-all. It's not everything. It's important, but it's not everything. So having a good, accurate load is going to be way better than trying to, you know, force a high BC bullet to work in a firearm that it just doesn't work very well in. Which brings up the point of accuracy, right? A lot of people will go buy some, and just for kind of standard, I don't care what you know, if you're using a bonded bullet, a high BC, you know, thin jacket, fast expanding bullet, I don't care what you're using. If you switch any component, you have to go to the range and re-sight in. And what we're going to see is that there's going to be variation. Sometimes not much, sometimes a lot. And I talk with a lot of people who will say, yeah, I tried one of those copper bullets. It didn't hit where I wanted to, or, you know, I didn't test it before I got in the field and I wounded something and it was a really bad experience. And I said, okay, that's fine. But if you had gone from, I hate to pick on companies, but say you had gone to a core locked to a PowerPoint and you went out and didn't re-sight in your rifle, you would have had the exact same problems, just as likely. You buy a new rifle, you don't just buy a box and go in the woods, you go and sight it in. It's the same concept with any of the copper stuff. Imagine you just got your rifle and you're testing ammunition, except for in this case, you want to try some of the copper stuff. You're not going to try just one brand, you may have to try a couple. That's one of the big benefits of my program, is that we're able to hold events at ranges where we will actually go out, bring ammo with us, let you try it in your own rifle and see which one shoots the best before you go buy a box. Now, hard to do right now with the whole social distancing thing, but we've had, you know, the ability to do that the last couple of years here in Oregon and given people a lot of opportunity to try out different types of ammo.
Yeah, and I think that's something, obviously, once this goes by, it'll be curious. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people very excited to, well, I was just going to say, look up events for shooting, and I see a question from Mike as well, who asked about bonded and said, how do I find events? So you may want to just bring that up real quick.
Yeah, the problem with events is we generally try to do them in partnership with local groups. So we're not trying to be the end-all, be-all here with the non-lead education. We partner with ranges and local chapters of hunting groups in order to host those, rather than having it just be us. So if you're a member of a local group, a chapter, or you know, you want to start something, you can get a hold of me. My contact info is on the nonleadpartnership.org site, as long as a bunch of other info about the partnership. And yeah, just shoot me an email, and we start talking about how to set one of those up. I mean, right now, I'm in Oregon. I'm doing Oregon events. But the hope with the partnership is that we'll have the ability to expand that out across the continent, so that people in, whether you're in Wyoming or Maine or Florida, if you're curious about it, we can find a way to get you an opportunity to test some ammo. Cool. And that brings up a good point for Oregon, and I see there's a number of folks who aren't from Oregon, but if you are in Oregon and you decide to use non-lead ammo, we've put together an online course on nonleadeducation.com, which I'm sure you can read when it's all backwards, right?
We can type it in.
Yeah, nonleadeducation.com. If you go on there, if you're a brand new hunter, you take the course as part, you can kind of take it as an extra piece to your hunter education, and show us you used non-lead. If you're going to buy some ammo for this year, show us your receipt, show us a picture of the box showing the brand and bullet model, and we'll enter you in to win some thank you gifts. We'll be raffling off some thank you gifts, including some Maven optics, a spotting scope, some binoculars, If you're a new hunter, you're in one pot. So there's going to be fewer new hunters in the world, so you got a better chance of winning. So tell all your friends you're bringing into hunting that they can enter that. And then the other one's for current hunters. And so hopefully there'll be more people in that pot, but still some good prizes. I think the spotting scope's going to be for that one, and we'll probably give away some nice binoculars for the new hunters as a better first tool for someone who's just getting going. And we've got a couple other cool prizes as well. First Light is offered up some gift cards and things like that. So we really want to thank people for trying it out. What I've found with the experience is once you try it, once you see how it works, most people are really happy with the bullets, really happy with the kind of on-game performance, and really happy with the, how little meat they lose when they're cleaning an animal.
And does the NonLead have a list of like manufacturers they've tested or that they recommend somewhere on the website? Or
if you go with to huntingwithnonlead.org, there's some information on there. Or if you just reach out to me, there's an email on nonleadeducation.com. You can email that, and that'll come to me eventually. I think it comes straight to me actually. But yeah, so I can get that list out to people who are interested. I mean, it gets updated a lot. There's a lot of changes, right? Technology is consistently advancing. So we try to keep it up to date, but it's always a little challenging with the number of manufacturers and companies making new stuff.
Yeah, because one of the questions we had earlier was what's the best non-lead 6.5 PRC at 500 yards or less for elk? And my thought was, one, that's very specific. And second,
is that Ian?
Yeah, of course it was. And, and I was like, a 6.5 PRC, come on. Just,
yeah. I mean, really, 6.5 PRC at this point, you're going to be wanting to get into reloading. I mean, this is one of the big problems. Performance is great with cocked bullets. An incredible success. I mean, I've shot hundreds of animals with them, and, they're phenomenal. The problem you run into is access most of the time. If you're buying any premium style of bullet, you're paying about the same price. You can order online, at least in Oregon. If anyone's in California, sorry, sucks to be you. It's kind of got screwed down there. But the biggest issue is finding it in a local store oftentimes, because it's just a smaller part of the market, and we're not asking for it as a community. Really, that's what it comes down to is, manufacturers will make what we want. If we're buying stuff, they're going to make it. And if we as a community kind of choose to go this route to support the conservation and stewardship of all species on the landscape, and are requesting the tools to do that, they're going to sell it to us. And that's really what we're trying to do with the partnership, is improve information and hopefully improve the desire, which improves the access, which improves the cost, right? I mean, simple economics 101, right? Supply and demand. If we're demanding it and there's a lot more of it available, costs are probably going to go down as well. So we end up with seeing kind of this continuation of where the costs are now. They've been dropping for the last 10 years, and I think we're going to continue to see them drop. Someone asked a question about what I use. For the last, I shoot a 270 generally, and out of my 270 for the last few years, I've been shooting the Barnes 130 grain tip triple shock. I switched last year to the 129 grain LRX just because I wanted to try it. It shot really well. It was about the same. I mean, I'm shooting MOA, a little under MOA, out of a stock Remington 700 with those. I'm loading up these cutting edge bullets to try out. It's their Maxima line, so we're going to see what that's kind of their more kind of average hunting range line rather than their more extreme long range. So we'll see how those shoot. If I can get those loaded up and working well, I might try those this year. I switch around a lot. I tested just about every type there is. I have a rifle that I shoot a different box of ammo through every time I go to the range, pretty much. I mean, I'm not just sold on anything, and it really does depend on what your particular rifle likes. There's no, same with any ammunition, right? There's no standard where I can say this one's the best no matter what. It doesn't work that way. There's too many variables in the manufacturing of both the firearms, manufacturing of the ammunition, all these different pieces. So it's really about getting out on the range, trying a few different things. If you've got friends with the same caliber, it's a great time for everyone to buy a different box of ammo, all go together and shoot some 5-shot groups and see which one's grouping the best, and go from there.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me back to the thought on bullet construction. You were talking about twist rate and bullet construction. And one thing I want to mention is there's a lot of great twist rate calculators out there online, so you can plug in all your bullet information and find out if it's going to be stable or not. Just again, something for those who may not know if they're watching or going to watch later, can you define an ogive and what exactly that is as far as a bullet?
Yeah, I can draw a picture of it even. I have the technology.
A pen and a whiteboard's technology? Oh my gosh.
It's all technology, right? It's a terrible picture, but it is a picture.
It's all that matters.
I'll exaggerate it a little bit. So the ogive of the bullet, you've got the tip of the bullet here. The ogive of the bullet is this section right in here. So it's where that bullet round kind of comes across into the actual diameter of the bore. And that's going to be different on different bullets, but it tends to be a more consistent measuring point for reloaders than the tip, because tips can vary a little bit in where they're at. The ogive tends to be pretty consistent. So getting an average length from base to tip is good, and then calculating what the difference between the ogive measurement and the total length average lets you kind of measure out a total cartridge length where you have a pretty consistent measurement spot, more consistent than the tip generally.
And one other question on bullet construction, someone asked it earlier actually that I jotted down, kind of continuing on that theme, even though it's not quite the same, is do different manufacturers use different alloys, and can that be softer or harder or affect accuracy?
They do use different alloys. So if you look at Barnes, they use, I believe, a pure copper. Nosler and the Hornady bullets use gilding metal, which is a 95% copper and usually about 5% zinc. So I think technically it turns it into a brass. The gilding metals tend to be a little bit harder. They're a little bit harder material, but the zinc does create some kind of, the way I've had it described to me, and to be fair, I'm a wildlife biologist, I am not an engineer, so I should have said that from the very beginning. I just really like this stuff. But the zinc creates a little bit of lubrication within the material, so it's a little bit of a slicker metal, and it's a little bit less likely to foul the bore than a pure copper. Now the technology has advanced to the point where we're not really seeing major fouling from any of the copper bullets anymore, mostly because of the addition of these bands. So these driving bands that they've developed, you can see kind of those little bits of banding right there. It's actually a groove in the shank of the bullet, and if you look at the rifling of a shot bullet, you can see that there's actually a little bit of material that's flowed from the full diameter part of the bullet and kind of pushed back into that groove. So it doesn't strip away, it just gets shifted around. It also reduces bearing surface a lot, so there's just less copper in contact to get kind of peeled away. So we've seen that technique, that technology has actually greatly improved accuracy for copper bullets. Some of the early ones were pretty finicky because they didn't have that, and if you had some variation in the bore, it didn't have a lot of flexibility to absorb that variation, whereas now with these style, we've seen a lot more consistent accuracy, or more consistent or varying platforms, firearm platforms, or different firearms in general. Seems to have helped a lot. There was a question about ammo sales. Sportsman's, yeah, it's finding it in a place can be challenging, because if people are starting to pick up that they like it and they can find it, they'll buy it. So it's another reason to make sure you're not just wandering the aisles and then disappearing. Actually talking to staff and saying, hey, you guys had this stuff last week. Where the hell is the rest of it? I would like to buy some, but you don't have any. I have to go somewhere else. Money does talk in the economy. If we're saying we want to buy stuff and we're going to buy it from them if they have it, they will try to stock it. And the more of us saying that, the better off we're going to be. From the kind of internal side, that's really important. I think from the external side, something we didn't really talk about is how much pressure we're under as hunters from the public. Public support for hunting is pretty good in general. I think we're like 85% public support for hunting and kind of across the board. Where we start to run into problems is where there's activities that are perceived as either unethical, irresponsible, or not respectful of wildlife themselves. And this is one of those ones where lead poisoning is an easy kind of chink in the armor for hunting. I'm a huge advocate for hunting, both for getting people outdoors, for the conservation benefits, for the wildlife management benefits, for feeding your families, the whole gamut. But the reality is that the public has a limited understanding. And so if they see people showing evidence that lead exposure is creating problems for wildlife, and the response from us as the hunting community is, well, it's not really a big problem. I don't think that's happening, or I'm not going to do anything about it. That's not going to go very well, and that's really going to erode our ability to continue the standard of good stewardship across time. The other, and some people will say, well, you're just, kowtowing to the anti-hunters. And it's not about kowtowing to the anti-hunters. The anti-hunters don't care what we do. What I'm about is finding the people that do support hunting and making sure they continue to support hunting. And this is a great technology that's available to us. And it's something that each individual one of us can do. There's a lot of conservation stuff that we can't do as individuals, like we can contribute to RMEF helping to purchase a huge tract of land and then giving that to the, the Forest Service or something like that to preserve it or conserve that piece of property for wildlife habitat. But this is something that each of our individual choices has a direct impact or potential impact on the conservation and stewardship of the landscape. And that's a pretty powerful thing if we can tell that story into the future.
There's a quick question here that they asked, what is BHA's stance on non-lead? And BHA is in support of non-lead. We let our hunters choose what they want to use, but we are fully behind the non-lead coalition and encourage people to research it and use non-lead when they feel that it is justifiable. That's a truncated version, basically.
And I mean, the partnership, that's our role. We have a resolution. It's kind of the guiding document for the partnership. We are a true partnership. We're not an incorporated non-profit or anything like that. We are a group made up of partners. And the resolution states that we will deal with voluntary programs, incentive programs, and education programs, and that's it. We don't deal in changing regulation, we don't deal in legislation, and we definitely do not deal in litigation to try to solve this problem. We're all about building the partnership and building partners so that we're all more successful in the long term.
Yeah. And speaking of conservation, I just don't know, this is a question I thought of, is there any studies on, aside from birds, because again, they're obviously kind of easy to track, are there studies on larger mammals, like scavenging mammals, like bears, or maybe, actually, it looks like we're about to end here, because we started a little early, I just remembered that, that's right, we only have an hour, so we got about 20 seconds. So just
real quick, there were some studies, mammals have a different digestive system, so they're less likely to show impacts. Raptors have a highly acidic and the way food moves through is different, and so they're much more likely